A time has come when the world plunged into chaos and despair, a despair humanity had never faced before. This story occurred in the year 2023. The everyday lives of the planet's inhabitants were suddenly interrupted when they were transported to another world. Mysterious sinkholes began to form across the Earth's surface, as if an invisible hand was carving out parts of the Earth's crust, along with those living on it. These events occurred in every corner of the world, from New York to Beijing. They were not dependent on population density or the geographical location of countries. These sinkholes appeared even in the deserts. These carved-out land pieces became the tops of enormous pillars, creating mysterious and inexplicable formations. Gradually, it became clear that the truth was far more terrifying than any assumptions. The land pieces transported to another world became the arena for a game, orchestrated by supreme beings referred to as players. Urban areas turned into pieces on this sinister game board. The players, who amused themselves with the fates and lives of others, rolled dice to move the pieces across a massive game board. The fate of the inhabitants of the relocated land areas is determined by the location of their zone on the game board. The tasks varied greatly, from winning a battle to finding a way out of a maze. The goal, to reach the finish with their piece, if such a finish even existed. The challenge to survive and pass the trials fell on the shoulders of those unfortunate souls whose lands were chosen as the playing fields in this new world of omnipotent players. On one of the pieces, numbered 76, there was a person who had already overcome much in this game and understood well how to navigate the challenges. But even he, an experienced player, couldn't be sure of the existence of an end to this game, as no one had ever reached far enough on the game board. However, as is known, everything eventually comes to an end. And for the 76th piece, the moment of defeat had arrived. There was nowhere to run. He could only accept his fate after doing everything he could for his salvation. The losing pieces were doomed to perish with no hope of salvation, and their fate was shared by all those on them. Recording his thoughts and experiences in diaries, the man from the 76th piece concluded his entries with the words, "I hope you avoid our fate." He also strongly warned that opposing the players is strictly forbidden. His vast experience in survival and overcoming countless trials convinces of one thing. The strength of a person or the power of their weapon is meaningless in this game. Ultimately, people are mere pawns in the powerful hands of players who have chosen them as participants in their sinister game. The lives of these pawns hold no value. Players can easily take them away without the slightest hesitation or sympathy. Over time, the man who wrote his thoughts in a diary turned into a skeleton, leaning on his shield. He was among the ruins floating in space when suddenly someone finally found him. They picked up the records scattered around the skeleton and began to read them. The man read some strategies that were quite well laid out. But these strategies were outdated, and he tossed the diary onto the floor with the other records of the skeleton, already knowing how things worked here. Moreover, he had already mastered flying in this world, unlike the deceased skeleton. Rising upward, he looked once more at the sitting warrior who failed to survive the game. Then he soared upwards, and at that moment, one of the players turned his head and noticed him taking off. In the player's hand were several dice, which he was tossing for the next move. At that moment, the guy soared high and pondered that there was a mistake in the records. The players could be defeated if one knew how to do it. Flying closer to the player, he gathered all his energy into his fist to deliver a devastating blow. The force of the blow was so powerful that it immediately caused an explosive reaction, and the space around was illuminated in red. After the strike, almost half of the player's face was missing, and his enormous body was falling downward. Describe the scale of the blow as being incredibly powerful. After that, Choi Yul demonstrated a guidebook that helped him fill in the missing knowledge and achieve such success in the game. He now certainly knew how to destroy a player, and he wasn't going to suffer here submissively until the end of his days just because of some silly game. He wanted to end this game that changed his life and the lives of others on Earth. For that, he needed to destroy all the players. He assembled an outstanding team of heroes to stand against the ruthless destroyers of planet Earth. With the help of these heroes and records from the Book of the Demonic King, he was set to overcome all trials and attempt to return to his home world. But let's go back to the very beginning, to understand how it all unfolded. It was a sunny day, with absolutely nothing foreshadowing disaster. Choi Yul was calmly going about his business, listening to music and in great spirits, a mood that nothing could spoil. Suddenly, the city began to split as if an invisible hand was cutting it into parts, something nobody expected. Then, right in front of Choi Yul, a barrier appeared, separating this part of the city from the other. He looked on in surprise, not understanding what was happening. It turned out that this day was the last peaceful one for those inside this new territory designated for the game. Suddenly, their territory was teleported to some unknown place in the midst of space with a flash of light, assigned the number 8. Then someone threw huge dice, with the number 3 on the top edge. This meant that their game board moved 3 steps forward, and they would have to defend against monster attacks. A new platform joined their game field, featuring a forest and water. People didn't understand where this land came from and what was happening. But they had no time to think. They had to defend themselves for 3 days, and they were given 4 key points to protect from the monsters. Otherwise, after the monsters captured these key points, their figure would lose, and they would all perish. Monsters suddenly appearing out of nowhere began to attack the citizens, who in panic tried to flee or hide in the city buildings. Choi Yul also instinctively started to run, but he knew it was pointless. The only thing to do was to stand up to these monsters. Then the citizens were given dice to throw, which had 100 numbers. Throwing this cube, the numbers indicated the set of equipment each of the citizens would receive. He rolled number 100, a chance of which was 1%, meaning he would receive an item of mythical rank. And so it happened. He was given the Book of the Demonic King Krasen, a mythical rank book. This book allowed learning information about everything, for example, locations of items, hidden events, information about monsters, the map, and the goal of the started mission. One could say he became a prophet after receiving this book. 3 hours after the monster attack on the city, 102 people died, and 7,023 were injured. Out of the 4 bases people were supposed to defend, 1 was destroyed. On the scorched road stood a girl with a spear in her hands and flaming wings on her back, a pillar of fire rising directly from her. This was Ko Hyoju, with minor burns and scratches, now wondering if it all had ended. Several other people, also looking exhausted after the battle, began to rejoice at their survival and victory. Suddenly, a military truck stopped behind them, causing them to turn around in surprise. Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon emerged from the truck and announced the arrival of the Korean army. He saluted the girl, acknowledging her hard work. Behind him, other soldiers began exiting the trucks and started the evacuation of the wounded and civilians, telling them they would be taken to the Namsan Tower, the safest place. Ko Hyoju turned to the soldier and asked if it was all over, to which he replied that phones and the internet were down, making it hard to assess the situation, but they were using radio communication. Suddenly, Choi Yul interrupted the conversation, holding a book, informing them that it wasn't over yet. He was injured and exhausted, but managed to reach the army to report that a boss they would need to battle was soon arriving. He also said that the book contained a lot of information, like details of the current mission, data on monsters, and even the level of mission progress. He showed the book to the soldier and the girl, who tried to discern something in it. But the pages were completely blank, with nothing written on them. They immediately surmised that only Choi could see what was written. However, Kwon Jae-yeon wanted proof and asked for some evidence. Choi Yul opened the book and read that the soldier wore a Helden helmet of heroic rank, one of 6 items in a complete set. He also said the book stated the soldier's name was Kwon Jae-yeon. Then he turned his attention to the girl's spear, informing them that it was a legendary rank weapon named the Empirical Fang Protuberance of the Fire Dragon. He also revealed the girl's favorite song. Choi Yul continued reading personal information about his new acquaintances, which Ko Hyoju found too private, and demanded he stop. Since the stranger knew even personal secrets of everyone, they believed him. And Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon contacted headquarters to report the stranger's abilities. In the future, Choi Yul would be isolated from people, pondering about who he is. If this world is a game, then he is clearly a glitched character in it, as the world's problems are too easy for him. And that's why he would be in his isolated chamber, as if a moderator found a bug and restricted his access to the world. But his hope of meeting people never faded. Choi Yul was certain that the day would come when he would step out into the world again. In his memories, he returned to the very beginning. There, Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon called out to him. He had received a response from headquarters about the current situation. The situation was far from normal, and there were no existing instructions for such a scenario. Since there was no existing plan, the Army's leadership decided to trust the information provided by Choi Yul. Headquarters demanded to contact them via radio and provide as much information and countermeasures as possible. Choi Yul established communication and informed them that he would be providing details about the defensive mission they needed to carry out. Their task was to protect 4 bases from waves of monsters, with each wave coming every 4 hours. At the end of each wave, there would be a boss. The boss of the monsters would have unique abilities and be much stronger than the monsters in the wave. To succeed and pass the test, They needed to repel attacks on the bases 4 times a day, 12 times in total over 3 days, and defeat all the bosses. Choi Yul would have all the information about this mission, and if everyone acted together, they could develop a winning strategy for the battle. This way, many people could survive. Choi Yul added that he would try to find a way to return everyone to their world in the future. His desire to help all people and his forward planning impressed Ko Hyoju. Choi Yul began to provide specific information about further actions to be taken. But first, he needed to check everything. Because when he received the book, he was unconscious and couldn't read the description of the mystical rank item that was given to him. And Krasen's book had a significant penalty for its use, which should be considered before using it. All rewards of survivors who benefited from the book's knowledge would transfer to the owner of Krasen's book. And this list already included Ko Hyoju and Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon. Everyone who was in any way connected to the ongoing events was included in the list of those who received help. This included not only people who directly received information from Choi Yul, but also those who heard the information from third parties, heard rumors, and so on. All their names were added to the list. Unaware of what awaited him, Choi Yul continued to lead the defense. A wave boss appeared, a 2-headed ogre, who fought in close combat but also used magic. Choi, showing a tactical approach, ordered to open fire on the enemy at long distances, instructing the warriors to engage in a shootout, keeping the enemy at bay. This strategy involved using the advantage of long-range weapons and avoiding the risks of close combat, thus minimizing casualties among the fighters. As the ogre advanced towards the defenders' positions, it suffered significant losses under the heavy fire. Every step forward cost it severe damage, as it came under the precise aim of skillfully handled long-range weapons. By the time the ogre reached the defense line, its strength was noticeably depleted, signaling its inevitable defeat. Choi Yul advised using fire attributes in battle, as the wave had a vulnerability to it. Choi, carefully observing the situation on the battlefield, waited for the perfect moment to act. That was when he decided to introduce Ko Hyoju into close combat. Her entry into the fight was meticulously calculated to make the most effective use of her combat skills and the advantages of her unique weapon, which was expected to be a decisive factor in this confrontation. She, with her fiery tornado, plunged into the fight with the ogre boss. No matter how strong the opponent was, he could not withstand the onslaught of Ko's fiery spear for long. The situation was under control, and Kwon Jae-yeon reported this to headquarters. The first wave was completed, and the people sighed with relief, unaware of how much the list of Krasen's demonic sovereignty had expanded in this time. On the token number 8, the number of residents was 193,256. Victims of the sovereignty were recorded as 176,542. 91% of the city's population was recorded as victims in one day. But this was just the beginning of Choi Yul's sins, of which he was unaware, and which would last until the end of the game. The defensive missions were similar to computer strategy games with base defense. Monsters head towards the bases that they need to destroy, while the defenders create obstacles. This time, the enemy waves were formed from goblins and orcs, belonging to the first level of strength. These creatures, while not particularly intelligent or powerful, presented a worthy challenge for the defenders, requiring clear coordination and strategic planning for successful repulsion of the attacks. The combat tactics Choi Yul read in the book were quite straightforward. First, shoot monsters from a long distance with weapons that cover a large area. When the main long-range weapons were reloading, the fighters promptly switched to using their reserve arsenal. This approach allowed them to maintain continuous fire and effectively hold back the enemy's advance, preventing them from getting close to the defensive positions without significant losses. First-level monsters are not known for their intelligence and recklessly charge forward, their numbers dwindling rapidly. Meanwhile, people give up defensive lines one after another, avoiding close combat and luring them into favorable positions. All this time, the wave of monsters receives damage, gets divided, and no longer has such an advantage in numbers and striking power. Then, as part of a well-thought-out tactic, the monsters were cunningly lured into the narrow spaces of alleys. This location was chosen deliberately. The confined space reduced their maneuverability and effectiveness, making them vulnerable and simplifying the task for the defending forces, where various types of ground traps were activated: explosive, laser, mechanical. And only after all this, groups of people with high-class equipment joined the fight. This way, losses among the human warriors can be minimized. Choi Yul alone decides which position to hold and which to abandon and retreat from. He coordinates everyone via radio, directing where more people are needed for reinforcement. The book from which he drew all his information updates in real time. It contains everything about the current situation on the battlefield and beyond. Choi Yul only needs to think about something and flip the page, and information about it appears immediately. He communicated via radio where each squad should take position, what equipment was suitable for long-range support, and from where and when the monsters would arrive. Without all this information, people would be doomed to defeat. Another ogre was taken down with a precise burst from a machine gun. Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon was at the forefront of the defense, and his squad's situation was entirely under control. They kept in touch with Choi Yul via radio. But Kwon Jae-yeon was a bit concerned because initially, their coordinator's words were advisory, and the final decision was up to the general staff. But now it seemed that Choi Yul was the one commanding everyone. His book had everything written in it, allowing him to take control of the entire multi-thousand-person city. Choi Yul addressed Sergeant Kwon, informing him that everything was almost over. He also reported that the boss of the last wave was approaching, but there was no need to worry. Choi Yul was confident that Miss Hyoju, sleeping in the truck's bed, would easily handle this boss. Ko Hyoju, extremely tired after constantly defending the city, didn't wake up even from the movement of the truck. However, a sharp, deafening sound resembling a stone rumble broke her sleep. It was a powerful, deep roar that made the ground tremble. Before her towered a massive stone golem, the last and most formidable opponent in this challenge. Its massive figure and imposing presence indicated that it was the pinnacle of all previous challenges, representing a significant increase in difficulty level. Ko Hyoju was surprised why she wasn't awakened earlier to help with this giant. But Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon explained their plan, which involved luring the boss out of the city with flare gun shots first. As if confirming the correctness of this plan, the giant slammed its stone hand onto the ground, causing a slight earthquake. If they had started the battle with the boss in the city, all 4 bases that needed to be protected would have been destroyed in an instant. To their relief, this giant was quite slow and had no resistance to the elements. Therefore, to win, they simply needed to bombard it with a hail of strikes. Choi Yul, after analyzing the situation, confidently stated that the efforts of Ko Hyoju would be more than enough to secure victory. His words carried deep trust in the girl warrior's skills and strength, highlighting her key role in the upcoming battle. The girl decided to fully trust their savior and asked what she needed to do. Choi Yul began to tell her that every item above heroic rank has its hidden feature. If certain conditions are met, its form changes, and new possibilities open up. These conditions are hidden even from the weapon's owner. Fortunately, there were no secrets in this world from Choi Yul, and he knew the hidden features of all items. He informed the warrior girl what needed to be done, and she went to confront the stone giant. However, despite the support and Choi Yul's confidence in her abilities, Ko Hyoju was still plagued by doubts about the correctness of her actions. Inner turmoil and uncertainty about her own strength hindered her full focus on the impending confrontation. From a distance, Choi Yul shouted to her that he was confident about what needed to be done and that she could fully trust him and the book. Ko Hyoju was very displeased with this because everything she was about to do went against her nature. But deciding that there was no other way to save all the inhabitants, she accepted her fate and stabbed herself with her spear. After that, the stone boss hit her, standing before him, with both hands with all his might. The power of the giant boss's strike was so great that its effects were even felt in the city at a distance. The city's residents felt the ground vibrate beneath their feet, like a distant echo of a powerful tremor, indicating the colossal strength of the opponent and the intensity of the battle. Kwon Jae-yeon feared for the girl, but Choi Yul quickly reassured him and said that she would be fine. At that moment, a fiery glow began to appear around the boss lying on the ground. As all the conditions were met, the hidden skill of the Fang Protuberance was activated. Choi Yul knew what was supposed to happen, but even he was astounded by the power of Ko Hyoju's new ability. She activated her skill, summoning the Empirical Fire Dragon, which could be used only once per mission. Naturally, a first-level boss was incapable of withstanding such incredible power. Suddenly, it was as if a small atomic bomb exploded in the clearing near the city. It was great that Ko Hyoju could destroy the boss, and it would be great if you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Moving on. In Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon's mind, thoughts swirled that they had rightly lured the giant outside the city limits. Otherwise, the fight with it would have destroyed half of the buildings. But seeing that the knowledge hidden in this book could be so destructive, he began to fear that it could also be dangerous for people. Misuse of this knowledge would be catastrophic for the inhabitants of this game token. It's good that the book ended up with a good person like Choi Yul. They returned to the city limits and received a notification that the people had successfully completed the defensive mission. Rewards were due for the survivors. The city's inhabitants, realizing they would have been doomed without these individuals, began chanting the names of Choi-yul and Ko-hyoju. Everyone received a message that points would be awarded to them after calculations. A shop also appeared where these points could be spent on necessities, healing, items, skills. 10 points could heal injuries, and 20 could regenerate lost body parts. The doctors in the hospital, who had been working tirelessly for days, sighed with relief. Choi-yul was genuinely delighted, realizing that the wounded would now be safe and receive necessary help. However, his smile gradually faded, replaced by an expression of seriousness and concern. People around also started noticing that something was wrong. They hadn't received their points. A message appeared to the people that their reward would not be given to them, due to the effect of sovereignty sacrifice. Choi-yul received a completely different notification. He was informed that 90% of the residents had been sacrificed, and his reward would be increased 100-fold. When the point tally was completed, Choi-yul received nearly 10 billion points. People around him began to look at him with distrust. First, there were a few voices of discontent, but soon everyone started shouting that Choi-yul had planned this from the beginning to take all the points for himself. He tried to justify himself to the crowd, sincerely expressing his surprise and misunderstanding about how the situation had unfolded. His words sounded honest. He truly did not anticipate such a turn of events, and was as stunned by the outcome. Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon tried to calm everyone, stating that the priority should be to care for the health of the injured. He then suggested the possibility of transferring or exchanging the accumulated points, considering that Choi-yul had not intended to seize all the points. Choi-yul immediately agreed and tried to transfer the points, but it was unsuccessful. He saw a description of his passive skill, the monopolistic desire of the Demon King. Due to this ability, Choi-yul could not trade or transfer items and points. Voices of people demanding their points and accusing Choi-yul of fraud were heard from all sides. But due to his passive skill, he couldn't even give people healing items. Completely despairing of helping the people around him, Choi-yul threw the book to the ground and asked Miss Hyoju to destroy it. The girl struck the book with her spear. The flames from her blow completely incinerated the book, leaving not even ashes. Having rid himself of the book, which was both a blessing and a curse, Choi-yul tried to find some way out of the situation. But unexpectedly, the book reappeared next to him in the air, whole and unharmed. Realizing it was impossible to rid himself of this curse, Choi-yul completely despaired and fell to the ground. At that moment, a city resident, whose brother was dying, ran up and begged someone to give him 10 points so he could save his brother. The city's residents, realizing they would gain nothing from the victory and couldn't save their loved ones, began calling for punishment for Choi-yul. A message came over the radio that the number of casualties was increasing, and the hospitals were overwhelmed with injured people. The residents were furious. Refusing to lose hope, Choi-yul tried to find an answer in his book, quickly flipping through the pages to find information on what he should do. There must be some way. At that moment, the metal barrel of a machine gun pressed against the back of his head. It was aimed at him by Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon. He said that Choi-yul had learned enough from this book, but all that knowledge had brought harm to the city's residents. Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon, addressing the gathered crowd, loudly announced the arrest of Choi-yul. His voice was confident and loud enough for everyone present to hear him. People around shouted for him to be punished severely, blaming this swindler for the fact that the injured wouldn't receive help. Pretending to bend down to put on handcuffs, Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon whispered to Choi-yul to run away immediately and try to find a way to rectify the situation. Choi-yul immediately opened the shop and purchased 30 agility points. This allowed him to jump onto the roof of a nearby multi-story building in a single leap. Disappointed that the deceiver had escaped retribution, the townspeople around expressed their indignation, calling Choi-yul various derogatory names. But he had already disappeared from sight, lost among the stone houses with his large leaps. There were only 24 hours left until the start of the next mission. This brief period underscored the urgency and importance of preparation, creating a sense of the inevitability of the upcoming challenge and the need to use every minute for maximum readiness for new challenges. Kwon Jae-yeon immediately began organizing order and ordered everyone to follow to the army-protected area. In one day, preparations had to be made. The wounded needed to be loaded into vehicles and taken to hospitals. Completely shocked, Ko-hyoju stood and watched Choi-yul flee. She couldn't believe that she could have been so wrong about the man she met. He had seemed like a good person, incapable of such a vile act. Meanwhile, The city was preparing for the next challenge. People were divided into groups. Those who wanted to fight were equipped with weapons. Those who wanted to evacuate to the secured zone were taken away in trucks. Elderly people were taught how to use pop-up windows, how to find locations of temporary bases and evacuation centers. Loudspeakers constantly announced that if anyone saw Choi Yul, they should immediately run away from him and not talk to him under any circumstances. Those who concealed the fact of communication with him would be punished. These messages from the loudspeakers had a depressing effect on Choi Yul. Not only did he realize that he could not help anyone, but he also became a despised outcast among the people. But gathering all his willpower, he began to devise a plan of action according to the current situation. With little time remaining, everyone prepared as best as they could. Kwon Jae-yeon held meetings with the staff, trying to come up with a strategy for responding to the upcoming mission. Ko Hyo-ju trained, wanting to be more prepared, understanding that the main burden of saving the city fell on her shoulders. Some city residents, seeking to ensure maximum safety for their families, decided to shelter them in the basements of houses. These actions were dictated by the desire to find the safest havens to protect their loved ones from possible threats that might arise during the next challenges and conflicts. Some, in desperation, demanded the impossible from doctors, while others went to churches, trying to pray away their sins. Morning arrived, marking the beginning of a new move on the game board. This moment symbolized another stage in their challenging journey, foretelling new trials and opportunities that could change the course of events in this complex and unpredictable world. The player again rolled the dice, deciding which specific task the residents of this token would face. The token was moved 4 spaces forward. A notification appeared with the name and content of the mission. Demonic columns would appear in the city, supporting a seal. They would be guarded by column defenders. Participants needed to destroy these columns. If the columns were not destroyed within the allotted time, the Demon King would be summoned. The next dice roll determined that 5 days would be given for the mission. It was then determined that there would be 3 columns. The only thing left to know was the defenders of these columns. Defender number 1 would be of the first level of difficulty. Specifically, the boss deprived of fate fallen angel. He roams the area trying to find his destiny. The second column's defender is also of the first level. The defender is the mad brain, a creature that can't stop creating things. Over time, it crafts its dreadful creations better and better. Meanwhile, the third column will be guarded by a boss of the third level of difficulty. This fact underscored the increased danger and importance of this location, as the presence of such a powerful enemy signified significant risks and potential challenges. The defender is the fencing master Goblin Jack. He has reached the pinnacle of martial arts and undergone body transformation. His desire is to fight the Demon King himself, so he will defend his column to the end. Choi Yul was lying on the floor of a room in one of the many now abandoned apartments in the city. After long and deep contemplation, he seemed to have finally formulated a plan. This moment reflected the intensity of his mental efforts and his determination to find an optimal solution in the current situation, highlighting his responsible approach and resolve in overcoming the upcoming challenges. Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon was at the headquarters trying to coordinate the participants' actions for the mission. However, he was informed via the radio that civilians had attacked the first boss on their own initiative. They decided to take matters into their own hands and were not following orders. Kwon Jae-yeon decided it was time for his squad to move out and asked where Miss Hyo-ju was. He was told that she had left on her own some time ago. In a situation where everyone is feeling fear and helplessness, even a well-developed system and coordination fell apart in less than a day. Managing such chaos was extremely challenging. Ko Hyo-ju decided that others could handle the first-level bosses, but Goblin Jack would definitely be too much for anyone else. Therefore, she went straight to his column. She was thoroughly prepared for this moment, aiming for a victory over the opponent before anyone else could get hurt. This determination was driven not only by the desire to win, but also by the wish to protect others from the threat. The boss, apparently bored, awaited the arrival of the Demon King. He knew that no one in this world could harm him. Ko Hyo-ju grabbed her spear and launched an attack using a fiery strike. The energy from her strike was comparable to an explosion, enveloping everything around in blinding light. However, when the flames cleared, it was evident that Goblin Jack hadn't even budged, confidently deflecting her strike with his sword. He skillfully and focusedly parried the sword. With a light movement of his hand, he pushed the attacking girl aside, demonstrating his superiority in martial arts. Then, still calmly sitting on the edge of a rock, Goblin Jack counterattacked. A blue beam of energy, like a deadly wave, rapidly headed towards Ko Hyoju. The beam was inches away from hitting its target when something unexpected happened. The boss turned in surprise towards the spot where his opponent's body should have been lying. But instead of one defeated enemy, he saw two people. Thanks to his increased agility, Choi Yul managed to snatch Miss Hyoju away from the path of the approaching Blue Death. After carefully placing the girl on the ground, Choi Yul asked her to tell the citizens that their rewards wouldn't be wasted. He would use them for himself and try to win alone. As he walked away from Ko Hyoju, he turned back and said that everyone should stay away from him if they didn't want to lose their points again. Choi Yul realized he couldn't return the rewards to the citizens, nor could he rid himself of the cursed book. The most sensible thing to do in this situation was to spend these points on strengthening himself. First, he raised all his characteristics to the maximum. A notification was sent to all the city's residents. It announced that Choi Yul had increased each of his characteristics to 100, further infuriating them. Next, the hero checked how many equipment dice rolls he had. It turned out he had 423,000 dice rolls. Choi Yul set the dice rolls to automatic and discarded all equipment below the magical class. Eventually, he obtained 142 legendary class items and 1,023 heroic ones. He also fully identified them. According to his plan, he would use all this for his own superiority, since he couldn't share it with anyone. He still needed the power of the Demon King. Choi Yul decided that he could protect the city himself and return to his normal life. And if this was the only way to atone for his sins, he would do it despite everything and regardless of how people insulted him. The fencing master Goblin Jack sat waiting for a strong opponent. But Choi Yul decided not to waste time now fighting the boss of the third column. He used the Boots of Magical Wind. This heroic rank footwear allows the user to jump and hover in the air but consumes mana when used. Informing the goblin that he would soon return to fight him, Choi Yul soared into the sky. Ko Hyoju was puzzled by his sudden departure. The boss, smiling, sat on a stone waiting for the hero's return who had challenged him. In an instant, Choi Yul reached the first column and its defender by leaping. He knew Goblin Jack wouldn't attack first, as he doesn't fight those who haven't attacked him. The first column's boss was unprepared for someone to fall on him from above. Utilizing the element of surprise, Choi Yul plunged into battle with the boss, delivering a powerful kick. Goblin Jack posed no danger to the city's residents as long as they didn't attack him. But the first two bosses needed to be dealt with quickly. Still furious, the townspeople met Choi Yul with hostility, still considering him a fraudster who maliciously took all their points. Ignoring their shouts and threats, Choi Yul continued to attack the boss. Attacking the column defender from various sides, he pondered that the unique feature of the defender manifests under certain conditions. Some features weaken the defender. However, the wrong approach could make the boss stronger, or give it a feature that makes the battle difficult or even unwinnable. This particular fallen angel must kill 100 people. If it does, it will evolve into the fallen angel of humanity's destruction, becoming much stronger and leaving the column with the desire to kill as many people as possible. Therefore, it made sense to deal with him first, leaving the fencing master from the third column for last. What mattered was not whether the mission would be accomplished, but how Choi Yul would do it. He needed to unlock the features necessary for the mission. After the final sword strike, the boss fell to the ground from the top of the column. At that moment, Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon and his squad passed by in a truck. He ordered everyone to stay away from the area and wanted to find out Choi Yul's intentions. In his thoughts, he wondered whether he could trust this person. Choi Yul hadn't found a way to return the points to everyone, but he also didn't seem like a bad person. Kwon Jae-yeon couldn't just blindly trust every stranger based on his feelings alone. Someone evil with Choi Yul's intellect and immense power could easily subdue the entire city. Even Miss Hyoju was completely uncontrollable and headstrong, which did not help in the efficient organization of mission execution. Miraculously not crushing the vehicle, the column defender fell next to the truck. His fall was so powerful that it threw the truck aside like a toy. The soldiers emerged from the vehicle and no one was seriously injured. Someone was standing on the fallen boss, holding its wings in hand. Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon recognized Choi Yul in this person, not immediately realizing it because he had changed so much since their last encounter. In one hand, he held the wings of the fallen angel. In the other, Choi Yul held a legendary rank sword called Divine Separator. Although the sword itself was not very strong, it transformed severed monster parts into items. That's why the boss's wings ended up with Choi Yul. Kwon Jae-yeon greeted Choi Yul and thanked him for killing the column's defender. However, the hero silently looked at the soldier and did not respond. In a moment, he soared upward with incredible speed and vanished from the people's view. Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon speculated that Choi Yul's silence was due to the sovereignty's sacrifice. Since he was helping them and not trying to seize the points again, he must have no bad intentions and was their ally. His thoughts were interrupted by one of the soldiers in his squad. With a frightened voice, the soldier reported that the fallen angel was still alive and began to stir. A system message appeared, stating that the condition for unlocking a hidden feature had been met. The fate-deprived fallen angel, deprived of its halo and wings, was evolving into a different being with the added feature of corruption. Before the soldiers could comprehend the situation, the Beast of Corruption, a second-level difficulty boss, stood before them. The soldiers instantly went into battle readiness, quickly and effectively organizing themselves for the upcoming fight. They demonstrated professionalism and determination, preparing to confront the enemy. Opening fire, Kwon Jae-yeon thought that with only 3 monsters in their mission, it couldn't be easier than the previous one, meaning these monsters together were as strong as an entire invasion of monster waves. Just as Kwon Jae-yeon began to feel that Choi Yul would be their ally, he left them alone to fight the second-level boss. The Beast of Corruption began attacking with red energy, and Sergeant Kwon called for reinforcements over the radio. But his squad members were already in a state of fear and ran away from the enemy. Kwon Jae-yeon fired at the column defender with his machine gun and ran in the opposite direction. He wanted to lead the boss away from the other people and wait for the reinforcements he had called for. But he underestimated the speed of the Beast of Corruption, and it quickly caught up with the fleeing sergeant. With a leap, the boss crushed Kwon Jae-yeon under its enormous clawed paw. The strike was so powerful that even the ground around where the soldier in uniform had just stood cracked. Watching from a cliff above, Choi Yul closed his book and observed. Everything was going according to his plan. A greenish glow began between the fingers of the Beast of Corruption. It jerked its paw back as if it had been burned by fire. In the same spot lay the soldier who was mercilessly crushed just seconds earlier. But something had changed. A system message appeared about the activation conditions of the hidden skill of the Helden helmet. Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon activated the Ghost of Helden skill, becoming possessed by the ghost of a cultist inquisitor. To activate it, one had to be on the brink of death due to dark or corrupt type attacks while leading a group of at least 5. The duration of this skill was 10 minutes. All equipment was imbued with divinity. The fanatic mode was activated, increasing attack and defense strength, removing fear, chaos, and temptation. The person under this skill loses control and attacks all dark or corrupt type enemies. The fanatic skill was also activated for all group members. The entire squad, even without reinforcements, attacked the Beast of Corruption, the first column's defender. Watching the skill in action, Choi Yul was a bit dismayed as the soldiers' attack resembled a zombie onslaught. After returning to the headquarters, Sergeant Kwon requested a new vehicle to replace the destroyed one from the battalion commander. Colonel Kim's son said that Kwon would get a vehicle without any problems. He also allowed the sergeant to act according to the situation, and not to ask for permission from the headquarters for task decisions. Kwon Jae-yeon doubted whether he deserved such treatment, but the colonel said that the headquarters had little information about the situation, and they needed someone judicious and level-headed. Kwon Jae-yeon, though doubting his worthiness of such trust, understood the importance of being a decisive and calm leader in the midst of crisis and uncertainty. A person who can make calculated decisions right on the battlefield. Hearing such a description of himself, Kwon Jae-yeon thought it was good that the colonel had not seen how the first column defender was defeated, because under the effect of the fanatic skill, all soldiers, including Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon, showed neither calmness nor rationality. They seemed to have completely lost the ability to think and control themselves as a squad. Had the colonel witnessed the entire fight, he would never have said that Kwon Jae-yeon and his squad could make logical decisions, because the soldiers, possessed by divinity, beat the boss with rifle butts and bayonets, then dedicated their victory to the goddess. Everyone received a notification that the Beast of Corruption, the first column's defender, had been defeated. The greatest contribution to the victory was made by an independent reconnaissance squad, led by Sergeant Kwon Jae-yeon. Far from these events, Choi Yul, smiling, informed his interlocutor that everything had been correctly calculated. The first column's defender was severely weakened from the battle with Choi Yul. So Sergeant Kwon's group could easily defeat it, even after the fallen angel became the Beast of Corruption. The boss's health did not regenerate after the transformation. Moreover, since the fallen angel became a different entity, Choi Yul's contribution to its defeat was no longer counted. Therefore, the system deemed that Sergeant Quan made the greatest contribution and awarded the reward to him. Choi Yul asked his interlocutor what they thought about all this, but it turned out that all this time, he had been conversing with the silently sitting Goblin Jack. Choi Yul was frustrated by the inability to have a conversation with anyone. He was even glad that the column defender boss listened to him. Next, the hero proposed a bet to the fencing master. If Choi Yul wins, he will break the seal of the Demon King. Goblin Jack listened with interest to the conditions proposed by the human. Meanwhile, Ko Hyoju was struggling against the creatures created by the second column's defender, the Mad Brain. He was creating and sending into battle anti-human machines M505. It was becoming increasingly difficult for Miss Hyoju to resist them. Responding to an alarm signal, she had arrived at the second column to help people fight the machines. But there seemed to be no end to the robots. For every one destroyed, 2 new ones appeared. Moreover, their design was becoming better and more advanced. For now, Ko Hyoju could resist them. But eventually, they would become so strong that defeating even one robot would be impossible. Realizing the critical nature of the situation, and that the Mad Brain was perfecting its creations by analyzing fights with previous versions, Ko Hyoju ordered a retreat. But some people, seeing an opportunity to earn some points, did not want to leave. Some wanted more points to upgrade their equipment, thereby increasing their chances of survival in the future. Others wanted to help their families heal from injuries. Nevertheless, most soldiers decided to retreat, realizing they were facing entirely different robots than those they had encountered at the beginning. 2 men with arbalists from the kingdom of Arin remained. They were firing precisely at the column defender. But even they noticed that the boss began to gather energy for some kind of beam and aimed its barrel at them. Ko Hyoju, seeing that they couldn't escape in time, came to their rescue and dispersed the fiery beam in different directions. Under such intense heat, her jacket began to burn, highlighting the extreme power of the fire she faced and the suddenness of the situation that demanded immediate action. Realizing she wouldn't be able to deflect another beam like that, she loudly ordered the warriors to leave. They didn't need to be told twice and ran away as fast as they could. Ko Hyoju smiled, pleased that she had managed to save 2 more people and that they finally listened to her. At that moment, the Mad Brain realized that Ko Hyoju posed a threat to it and began a full analysis of her. Immediately, it began creating the anti-Ko Hyoju machine. Noticing a new model on the battlefield, the girl warned the others. It was imperative to stop its production as soon as possible. At this moment, all robots on the battlefield targeted Ko Hyoju. Using all their capabilities, they rushed towards her to delay her until the arrival of the new robot model. Ko Hyoju decided that if the situation had turned out this way, it was even better. She commanded the remaining warriors to leave as quickly and as far as possible, deciding to use the summoning of the Empirical Fire Dragon. After ensuring that the people had left the impact zone, she used her skill, which could be used once per mission. A blast of enormous power occurred on the battlefield, with flames as high as a huge house. Seeing that the robots were destroyed, Ko Hyoju exhaled in satisfaction and smiled. However, the Mad Brain boss was unharmed, protected by a defensive field from the fiery tornado. Following this, a new robot of an unknown model suddenly appeared in the clearing. It was an elite monster, the anti-Ko Hyoju machine of 2nd level difficulty. It was completely fire-resistant, equipped with a Dragon Slayer, inflicting additional damage to Ko Hyoju, automatically detecting and pursuing her. It instantly appeared behind her. Miss Hyoju didn't have time to turn around and parry the attack. The robot struck her so hard that she flew several dozen meters before falling to the ground. Losing consciousness from the damage taken, Ko Hyoju noticed someone else appearing on the battlefield. This person attacked the second column defender from the air. With a single strike, he destroyed one of the boss's brains. The robots guarding the boss didn't even have time to react. Before completely losing consciousness, she recognized the person as Choi Yul, and seeing him fly away, was utterly confused. The anti-Ko Hyoju machine approached where its target's corpse was expected to be. But instead of the anticipated body of the girl, it found only traces of blood on the ground. Since the target was absent, it detected traces and switched to pursuit mode. Destroying one of the brains of the unified Mad Mind triggered a hidden feature called Mad Order. The boss repeats the production of the last non-elite robot, doubling the production speed and the number of creatures created. The production won't stop until the main brain is destroyed. Standing amid the destroyed houses, Choi Yul looked at the seal of the Demon King, pondering what had happened recently and what had already been accomplished. The first column lasted longer than expected. Too many people hid in basements out of fear, and those who remained to complete the mission lacked firepower. The second column had not been destroyed yet. Resisting, people were destroying hundreds of produced robots. They were joined by army troops freed up after the complete neutralization of the first column. Choi Yul could easily clear all the columns, but it would be pointless. To win the game, not just the current mission, the entire city needs to become much stronger. But his passive skill, which prevented him from talking to people, was a significant hindrance in accomplishing this task. Therefore, everything must be done intelligently, and some preparations are needed. A competent commander is required. Choi Yul had one in mind. Also, a strong fighter, preferably of the highest level with good equipment, should be sought as soon as possible. Waking up after losing consciousness, Miss Hyoju was surprised to find herself alive. She turned to the person standing next to her to express her gratitude. However, standing there was not quite the person she expected to see. And it was definitely not a human. The fencing master goblin. Jack silently watched the girl, and when she screamed in fear, he quietly and briefly asked her to be quiet, not to disturb the idyllic calm of the moonlit night. Ko Hyoju apologized, not expecting the goblin to be capable of speech. The second column's boss informed her that he had healed the warrior girl's wounds, and stated that they had little time, so it was better to start immediately. Ko Hyoju didn't understand what needed to be started, and the fencing master informed her that Choi Yul had a plan. Meanwhile, the elite monster anti-Ko Hyoju machine continued its pursuit. It flew through the cloudless sky, and only 325 meters were left to the detected target. Switching from tracking mode, it activated the destruction mode of the designated target. This change in behavior indicated a new level of aggression and focus, with all its functionality and resources directed towards the final task, eliminating a specific target. Without stopping, it powerfully descended upon Ko Hyoju from the air. However, instead of the expected hit, its fist met a man's hand, which effectively blocked the attack. At that moment, Choi Yul's loud laughter was heard, demonstrating not only his confidence, but also the irony of the situation, where a sudden and powerful strike was effortlessly stopped. The accessory he carried was of heroic class and confused monsters with the machine attribute. Therefore, the anti-Ko Hyoju machine mistook him for its target. Being unable to determine who was in front of it, the elite monster continued its attack. Ascending to a balcony of a destroyed multi-story building and holding the bound by madness brain, Choi Yul mockingly teased the elite monster. The monster continued firing from the Dragon Slayer, not understanding why the target wasn't being eliminated. After Choi Yul confirmed that the robot had decent firepower, he devised a plan to use this machine. Near the first column, people were still trying to destroy it, using various types of weapons. However, even though the column's defender was gone, it was not an easy task. Suddenly, to everyone's surprise present, a powerful blue beam struck the column. After one salvo from the elite robot, the column resembled a charred matchstick about to crumble into pieces. Choi Yul decided that this was an appropriate level of weapon power, and one less problem to worry about. Hence, he needed to continue playing hide-and-seek with the anti-Ko Hyoju machine, and the time he was winning for others was not being wasted. On the moonlit clearing, Goblin Jack was teaching Ko Hyoju the intricacies of combat in this world. She defended against his attacks using her empirical fang of the fire dragon. The first advice the fencing master gave her was particularly relevant after the battle with the robots, where Ko Hyoju nearly burned her clothes. Since this fiery power doesn't belong to the warrior girl's body, its use can harm her. Therefore, instead of blindly expending so much power, it's better to use only as much as she can control. It's not the power that controls the warrior, but the warrior must control the power. Ko Hyoju proved to be an excellent student, quickly grasping everything the fencing master taught her. She asked various questions, trying to understand the wager that Choi Yul had made with the third column's defender, and whether she could defeat that robot. However, Goblin Jack did not answer her questions and silently turned away. Instead, he asked her why she allowed herself to be taught. Was it because she trusted Choi Yul, or simply wanted to become stronger? Faced with such a question, Miss Hyoju was at a loss for words, as she herself did not have enough information to clarify it. Her ignorance in this aspect emphasized the complexity of the situation and the unpredictability of the events in which she found herself. She explained that this world was like some sort of game, full of missions and many things unfamiliar to her, and she wasn't smart enough to figure it all out on her own. So, for starters, she wanted to strengthen her body to survive longer and hopefully understand something in the future. Warming up before the next training session, she smiled and said that she had always lived by such a principle, and thanked Goblin Jack for agreeing to train her. In turn, he deeply pondered. At first it seemed to him that Choi Yul was merely using this girl for his purposes. But it turned out she was a fighter, following her own path. Realizing this and that he had a worthy disciple, he decided to make the training sessions more serious and in-depth. 3 days later, the city streets were completely deserted. Most people hid in metro stations, the entrances of which were guarded by the military from the main headquarters. Some wanted to go out and help other people and the army, but the fear of dying or losing points made them continue to stay safe. Suddenly, there was some elusive sound from behind the wall, and then it collapsed with a crash. From the breach in the wall emerged the anti-Ko-Hyoju machine. It continued tracking its target, and discovered that she was hiding in one of the underground metro stations. The robot opened fire, once again attempting to complete its mission. After firing at the target, the elite monster began to inspect the site where Ko-Hyoju should have been hit by its shot. However, it found that it had destroyed not the target, but an accessory carried by Choi Yul. At that moment, it detected the real signal of Ko-Hyoju's location. She was just a couple of meters behind its back. She appeared suddenly, and people thought an angel had descended from heaven. Her equipment had undergone significant changes for the better. Ko-Hyoju had completed a special event. She became a disciple of the fencing master Goblin Jack, and thus inherited his fighting style. She also received heroic class equipment as a reward. Sitting on top of a building, Choi Yul and the fencing master discussed where the goblin got the female armor. Goblin Jack replied that it was a relic from ancient times. Choi Yul asked Jack what he thought about his disciple's chances. He replied that the chances were 50-50. This high-tech mechanism was created as her natural enemy and had a set of skills for her easiest elimination. But Ko-Hyoju had learned all the martial arts skills of the fencing master. If the seed planted by Goblin Jack grows correctly, then this robot will become a heap of scrap metal. Choi Yul began to recall what they had accomplished since the mission began. 3 days and 15 hours after the start, people had destroyed the first column. The forces freed after its destruction were then redirected to the second column, and 3 hours later, through the combined efforts of all the people, the defender of the second column was defeated. After 3 days and 21 hours, Ko-Hyoju personally defeated the elite monster, the anti-Ko-Hyoju machine. The city's residents, present at this event in the metro station, were astonished by the young woman's strength. And exactly 4 days later, all the human forces reunited on the field near the second column. After almost 4 hours, it too was destroyed. People began to think that they could handle the mission, and were uplifted in spirits. They thought they managed with the first defender without Choi Yul's help, and Choi Yul wasn't even seen in the fight against the second. Choi Yul read these thoughts of the people in his book, and involuntarily smiled at the naivety of his fellow citizens. Goblin Jack approached him and said, now that his disciple had defeated the elite monster, it was time for the man to fulfill his part of the deal. Choi Yul had no intention of deceiving even a goblin and got up from his seat. The city's residents, together with the army, were making the final preparations to march on the third column and its defender. Sergeant Kwon Dae-yeon received a radio message from Colonel Kim's son that he would be promoted if the mission was successful. Ko-Hyoju, approaching the military, said that everyone was ready to set out. Kwon Dae-yeon asked if Ko-Hyoju was sure she would be all right, to which he heard the reply that she had promised her teacher that the next time they met, they would be enemies and fight seriously. Sergeant Kwon, hearing this answer, pondered. He did not share the confidence of those around him. He understood that a boss of such difficulty would not be easy, and even Ko-Hyoju might find it challenging. This meant many could suffer. And what exactly had Choi Yul planned? He must have some plan. At that moment, people noticed someone moving vertically upwards towards the seal of the Demon King, at tremendous speed. That someone was Choi Yul. He crashed into the seal at full speed, thus destroying it. Participants received a system message stating that the mission objective had changed because the seal of the Demon King was destroyed by a participant named Choi Yul. And since the seal is broken, to successfully complete the mission, the Demon King must be killed. From the newly created breach in space, a stream of monsters flooded through. People, who had just begun to forget that Choi Yul had appropriated their points, again started to insult him because he had once again put them in danger. This time, even Ko-Hyoju and Kwon Dae-yeon stood shocked by the act of the man they trusted. The master of fencing observed the gateway to the demon world, and contemplated that there were indeed interesting people in this world. He still didn't fully believe that Choi Yul would keep his promise. He soared into the air and in a second sliced the nearest monsters to him. The people realized they would have had no chance against such a powerful defender of the column. Goblin Jack advised his disciple to take advantage of this opportunity and dedicate the remaining time to destroying the flying creatures to earn as many points as possible. Meanwhile, Choi Yul was already in the demon world. It was a place of impenetrable darkness, uninhabitable for an ordinary human. But for such an occasion, he had the legendary class accessory, the Halo of the Fallen Angel, in his inventory, which protected its user in the demon world and hell. Choi Yul saw the sitting demon king, quickly approached him, and asked the question that intrigued him. Was this demon familiar with the demonic king of sovereignty Krasen? Standing opposite Choi Yul was the elite boss, demonic king of power Ktumbara. His main feature was that he destroys his enemies with his bare hands and absorbs their flesh to strengthen his fists. The demon replied that he was not familiar with the name Krasen. Choi Yul understood that the elite boss was lying and that demon kings must somehow interact with each other. Realizing that getting an answer would take more time, he mockingly informed the demon king that his opponent was near. The demon laughed, thinking that a mere human believed he could have an opponent in battle rather than a victim. Intending to crush the insolent fool, he delivered a monstrous blow from behind. Upon reaching the demon world, Goblin Jack witnessed an interesting scene unfolding. Choi Yul reflexively blocked the demon king's attack, thereby damaging his hands, which he was so proud of and had spent much time and effort to enhance. The human immediately began apologizing, insisting he had blocked the blow instinctively, not intentionally. The boss was furious and began to regenerate his limbs, rapidly restoring them. Choi Yul asked the master of fencing if he would like to switch places with him, to which the master replied that he would gladly do so, but there was someone else who would not agree to this. The demon king struck again. This time, Choi Yul did not block the blow. He was flung far in the direction the boss's strike had sent him. Though the path he traveled through the air was substantial, he suffered virtually no damage. He knew that in the battle between the defender of the third column and the demon king, there would be only one outcome. The hidden event, Fate of the Master of Fencing, would conclude with Goblin Jack mutually annihilating with Demon Ktumbara. If this happens, the residents will earn more points, and the overall rewards for the mission will increase. The Demon King continued to beat Choi Yul, but he was wearing the Einherjar battle jacket, whose protection allowed him not to worry about the damage he received from this boss. Choi Yul pondered his next move, but it seemed he couldn't do anything about the grim outcome of the fight between Goblin Jack and the demon. The hero decided to wait until the people accumulated enough points in the battle with the flying monsters, then end everything before anyone got killed. Goblin Jack decided that it was his time to fight the demonic king of power Ktumbara and fulfill his ultimate desire. Meanwhile, on the ground, the battle between humans and monsters was in full swing. People were fighting back as best as they could, using all available means of attack. Sergeant Kwon Dai-yun realized that these monsters were not serious opponents, but their sheer number was overwhelming, and the people wouldn't be able to hold out very long without losses. Choi Yul became the city's main enemy after breaking the demon's seal. If anyone died, it would be on his conscience. Ko Hyoju wasn't standing in the general formation on the battlefield. She was responding to help signals where there were few warriors, and people needed help. With her new skills, she could single-handedly confront a dozen such monsters, eliminating them in groups. But most people couldn't grasp Choi Yul's plan and continued to insult him, thinking they would have already completed the mission if he hadn't broken the Demon King's seal. After helping another group of people, Kanchu approached Ko Hyoju and asked why her boyfriend had acted this way towards everyone. Miss Hyoju was stunned by such a question and found herself at a loss for words. Her friend then remarked that she thought Ko Hyoju would defend her boyfriend, but it turned out she had a cold heart. Embarrassed and blushing, Ko Hyoju tried to explain that Choi Yul was not her boyfriend. Kanchu didn't believe her and threw a packet of chips into Ko Hyoju's hands. She said it was all she had, and these chips were a token of gratitude for saving them. But before Ko Hyoju could start eating the chips, they were already gone. In the demon world at that time, the master of fencing stepped in front of Choi Yul, ready to fight the Demon King. With a light smile, he remarked that he started to like Choi Yul. Choi Yul replied that if they met in another world, they could have had a drink together in a bar. As Goblin Jack charged at the demon, he even began to sympathize with and feel for his strange acquaintance. It was too late to activate the fate of the master of fencing, which meant Goblin Jack was doomed in his fight against the elite boss. Even if Choi Yul could activate the hidden property of the third column's defender, causing both bosses to mutually annihilate, he didn't want to do it. He felt guilty for using Goblin Jack, who had done him no harm, for his personal goals. At that moment, his book glowed red, and a system message appeared, indicating that he had reached the maximum level of friendship with Goblin Jack. This activated Krasen's hidden skill. Choi Yul began reading with curiosity to find out what this skill was. He realized that he could do something, instead of just watching the master of fencing perish in an uneven battle. Goblin Jack realized that he couldn't emerge victorious from this fight. He decided to use his most powerful technique, which would put his life at stake, in the name of his new friend and pupil. But before he could start his special skill, Choi Yul whirled past and beheaded the Demon King with a single blow. The master of fencing looked at Choi Yul in surprise. If he wanted to help, why didn't he intervene earlier? And after completing the mission, the third column's defender would be erased from this world. The elite boss exploded from Choi Yul's incredibly powerful blow, and a notification appeared that the Demon King Kutumbara had been defeated, with Choi Yul contributing the most. The next notification was that all summoned monsters would be destroyed. Goblin Jack braced for death. However, Choi Yul had an alternative plan for the unfolding events. He gained the passive skill recruitment of the Four Lords. According to this ability, the holder can sign a spirit-familiar contract with a being that has maximum levels of friendship or fear towards the owner. Choi Yul offered to sign this contract with Goblin Jack. The goblin couldn't miss the opportunity to avoid being destroyed. The demon world closed, and Choi Yul, falling from the sky, reflected on how strangely things had turned out. Although he tried to help everyone, people hated him, and he had just made a friendly contract with a monster. But not everything was so bad. His plan worked, he made a friend, and the fact that people despised him and considered him a fraud and a liar wasn't so scary. What was a little frightening was that Choi Yul was gradually becoming less human. Upon completing the mission, all people received their due rewards. Sergeant Kwon Daeyeon was in third place for points earned, with 3,200 points. The first place was, of course, Choi Yul. He gained over 200,000 points. In second place, with 4,500 points, was Ko Hyoju. Sitting on the roof of a building was Kan Chu, pondering who Choi Yul really was and whether Ko Hyoju was telling the truth when she said that their hero wasn't her boyfriend. Sergeant Kwon Daeyeon's thoughts were more pragmatic. He thought about the world they were all thrown into, disregarding the opinions of the people. As the game was apparently originally conceived as a base defense with a large number of soldiers. And how acceptable is it in such a game to have a great warrior, 1,000 times stronger than all the others? Isn't it wrong to have a character who can defeat an elite boss with a single blow? The same observation came to the players. They realized that there was an anomaly in their game. The character Choi Yul, of the ordinary resident class, reached the maximum level and maximum characteristic values in just 2 trials. The system offered the player 4 actions regarding this anomaly: destroy, reboot, postpone, or summon. Choi Yul had no way of knowing about these options, as they were exclusively available to the player. Without hesitation, the player confidently pressed the destroy button. This choice reflected his determination and clear understanding that the anomaly had to be eradicated without delay. If this captivating story has struck a chord with you, please share your thoughts in the comments, and I will definitely prepare a continuation just for you. Your opinion means a lot to me, and I am eagerly looking forward to sharing the next chapter of this thrilling adventure with you. Thank you for watching, and see you soon on the channel.